Good evening and welcome back to Sportshire. I'm your host, Griff McClellan, and today I'm joined by guest Tom Deck. Today's episode is all about March Madness. Let's start. Let's start by discussing Duke. Why not?
It's a good place to start.
Zion Williamson was the most discussed athlete by far this year. His tournament was a bit rocky at times, though. Would you say so?
Yeah. I mean, I think he was certainly the story of the tournament and probably the story of the ACC in the season. So much so that I think Barrett got a little undershadowed on him. And truthfully, I think Barrett, is as good a player, if not better, and might get drafted ahead of Zion.
Yeah, there's talk about that Barrett should go ahead of Zion.
Yeah. But deservedly so that they got a lot of the press and a lot of the accolades. Both of them super athletes. Zion is, physically just very gifted. Can do it all on the floor and fun to watch. Duke is always kind of a main headline in college basketball, so it was fun to watch. Am I surprised that they are out of the tournament at this point? Not really, but that's how the tournament goes.
Mm-hmm. And Duke was the heavy favorite going into the season and into the tournament as well. They were the #1 overall seed.
Yeah.
However, they narrowly escaped UCF as UCF missed a layup in the final seconds, and then they narrowly escaped Virginia Tech. They won those games by a combined total of 3 points. That was the first time that had ever happened in Duke's program history. So they had a really, really rocky road this tournament down the stretch.
I mean, historically, it always seems like the naysayers will say they always get the easiest bracket going through. But the competition was certainly stiff in there. And I think actually of those games were probably the most entertaining just because everything came down to the last second on both of those. And again, you'll have your people crying the referees kind of helped them out on a few of those calls there, which I don't know if that's true or it's not true. I'm not a conspiracy theorist on that sense, but the writing was on the wall certainly for Duke to lose to Michigan State, judging by how they played, their last two games going into that one. So understandable that they lost, I guess.
That was a great game between Michigan State and Duke. Both teams battled it out to the very end.
Fantastic game in my bracket. I didn't see that coming. Michigan State, to me, didn't kind of have the experience or the depth that Duke did. But, that's what makes the tournament amazing is the seeds come from places you don't normally imagine. And I'm sure a lot of people had Duke going deep, and it didn't pan out. But kudos to Michigan State. They're putting together a nice little run here, and they deserve to win. They played better basketball in the end.
Mm-hmm. According to CBS, 46% of brackets filled out via this website had Duke going all the way.
Yeah, well, in a bracket pool that I was in, I think of the 25 people that were in it, I think probably 18 or so took Duke going that far.
I did, yes.
And understandably so. On paper, they were the #1 overall seed, and they had a great resume going in there, and historically, a great tournament team. Coach K, fantastic X's and O's guys and recruiter. So understandable that they were the #1 seed. And hey, it'll still be entertaining even though they didn't make it to the Final Four. It's just another interesting storyline, to the brackets.
Yes, and another team that didn't go as far as they have in years past this year was Villanova, the defending champs and the champs from 2016 as well. What would you say about them? Were you surprised by their performance this year?
Yeah, in some ways, yes, just because of historically how they played a few years ago. But really, I think the storyline there is, I think what's hurting them is the conference. I think the Big East is a shadow of what it used to be as far as from a competitive standpoint. They do put some good games in the early season before the Big East starts, so you got to give Villanova and Coach Jay Wright credit. However, I think over the body of the season, the Big East is just not as competitive as it used to be, and I don't think it prepares them for the rigors and the heat of competition that you'll see in March Madness. So in that sense, I'm not. I think the Big East is down, and I think Villanova, paid the price this year for having maybe not as tough competition during the season.
Yeah, Villanova, as I mentioned, they won the 2016 and then 2018 national championship. It's really hard to repeat in college basketball these days. The last team to do it was the Florida Gators in back-to-back from 2006 and 2007.
Yeah, wow. Think about that. That was an amazing run for them. And like you said, you make a very good point there. It is hard to repeat. The competition is deep. There's college basketball is as popular as it ever has been. So It's a valid point. It's always tough to repeat. They just, not that I'm going to rule Villanova out in years to come. I don't think being in the Big East is going to hurt them too bad. I just think it hurt them a little bit this year.
Yeah, there's no denying they're a fantastic team, and they could win it all next year.
They could. They always seem to have good recruiting classes, and they should be up in there again. I don't think anybody's going to rule them out. Again, interesting storyline to the tournament. They just didn't perform the way that kind of a lot of people expected.
Yeah, all teams have off years at some point, especially Kansas as well, who had previously won 14 consecutive Big 12 regular season titles, and this year it came to an end as Texas Tech outplayed them.
Yeah, think of that. I mean, another historic, storied program. Kansas always traditionally plays well, good bodies. I didn't particularly see that one coming, as probably a lot of people didn't, with Auburn kind of stepping up in there and kind of having a Cinderella run. You know, so I'm probably more surprised by Kansas than I am about Villanova this year, truthfully. But hey, it's, a 4 seed, losing in the second round is not unheard of in this day and age in the bracket. So I think Auburn's a cool story.
Oh yeah, definitely.
But it is a little surprising that Kansas, with their pedigree and the history, and they had a good team. On paper, they were a pretty solid team. I don't think a lot of people pictured Auburn being as tough as that they're playing now. So
I had Auburn losing in the first round to New Mexico State. I picked the upset there. I'm always a fan of picking 12 over 5.
There's always a 12-5 in there.
In 30 of the last 35 tournaments now, at least one 12 seed has beaten a 5 seed. So I figured that was the one, and New Mexico State came so close.
Yeah, I had Marquette, Murray State. That was my 12-5.
Same.
Everybody has to throw one of those in there, and I understand. And I probably could have gone either way with the Auburn one as well. It just happens I had them going a few games into it and losing to Kansas. But that's the way the ball bounces. The 12-5 is always an interesting statistical anomaly in the thing. I wonder when we'll have a 16 beat a 1. You ever think that will come to fruition at some point?
Yeah, UMBC over Virginia last year, first time ever, and who knows when the next time it'll happen. But
very tough to predict. Very tough to predict.
Mm-hmm. All right, moving on to the Sweet 16 now. I think the best game of one of the best games of the tournament was between Purdue and Tennessee.
Great game.
Purdue had an 18-point lead, squandered it. Tennessee came back. It was back and forth in the end, and then Purdue tied the game and eventually won in overtime. What are your thoughts on that contest?
Yeah, I like that one. That was certainly a good game. I had Purdue in that one. Again, a good lucky guess. I felt like Tennessee was a little, again, maybe a tad bit overrated coming into it, and I felt like Purdue maybe had the legs and the hunger to get out there and get it done. But an excellent game. You always love the overtime games. You always love the comeback. You can't walk away from a game at halftime during March Madness because you never know where it's going to go. But that was certainly a good game in there. And Tennessee was unfortunate they didn't pull it out, but Purdue is proven to be pretty tough come tournament time.
Yes, and to add on to your comment about overtime games, there were so many overtime games, especially lately. And Purdue's next game would be against Virginia, whom they should have beaten, in my opinion.
It was certainly a good game, and I understand why you feel that way. It was certainly a close battle. Virginia being the only one seed that made it that far, or at least made it to the Final Fours. You got to hand it to them. They've kind of put it together. They play in a tough. The ACC is a tough, tough league to play in. A lot of good games. Every game there is hotly contested. So they were used to the battle. They were used to having those tight games and going to overtime and the crowd going wild. It's something that they're, I think, used to being in the heat of the battle with the ACC.
And I did say that Purdue ought to have won that game because they had a big lead in the end.
Yeah.
But if you think about it, Virginia was the better team all around because for Purdue, Carson Edwards was on fire. He had 42 points. No other teammate reached double-digit points.
Yeah, and I think that was the downfall. If you look at Virginia, they got a very balanced attack. Kyle Guy kind of leads the way with 15 points a game, and it's very spread out. And that's the high scores, 15 points a game. The next is DeAndre Hunter, and they have pretty even scoring throughout the bench. And I think that suits you well in tournament time. You're not totally reliant on one guy kind of carrying the load. Certainly there's always a Cinderella story or a player that comes out and lights it up. And you just hope they continue that, because if they don't, a lot of your offense tends to come out of that little pool there. But give Virginia credit, because they had a good balanced attack, and they happened to pull it out.
Exactly. In these days in the tournament, it's all about who has the deeper roster, who has the better overall team. And in the end, that's what wins games.
Yeah, I think so. I think one of the storylines that you can highlight about the tournament in recent years is the fact that Duke, with on paper a really good team, but really two freshmen. You know, the teams that maybe have more seniors, the mid-majors have made a mark.
The experienced ones.
Exactly. The mid-majors that maybe got a few seniors and juniors on their team can have a tendency to kind of make a run, or an unexpected run. And in this case, you know, Duke, they didn't have a lot of depth, and their two freshmen maybe didn't pull it off. But, you know, Virginia had the balanced attack, and I think that worked out to their favor in this one.
And back to Duke for a quick second. There's no denying Zion Williamson and R.J. Barrett are a fantastic duo. They lit up the scoreboard all season. They were great athletes. But in the end, they didn't have experience, and that's what cost them.
I think that's what, you know, in the heat of the battle, you got to be able to keep your head about you when things get tough. And I think that those close games, they felt like they were getting away with it at the end. And I think that inexperience just finally caught up with Michigan State. And, you know, it's look at some of the other teams that maybe have younger rosters, like at Texas Tech. They don't. They're a little bit younger. They don't have a lot of one-and-done guys on their thing. So maybe a more cohesive unit. Yeah, I don't know. I think that's a storyline we're going to see in the tournament going forward. Some of those mid-majors and some of those teams that keep players to junior, senior year, maybe they make a better run than some of these one-and-done type programs. So it's always an interesting storyline in that sense.
All right, speaking of going forward, let's preview the Final Four.
Awesome.
This weekend. The teams are Michigan State in their 10th overall, Texas Tech in their first ever, along with Auburn as well, a huge surprise. And then the only one seed remaining, Virginia.
Yeah, interesting. I mean, I don't think many people had this Final Four when they drew up their brackets.
I don't know how many, but
it would be, you know, it would be kind of crazy. Again, I don't think anybody saw Auburn making this kind of run that they have, but hats off to them. You know, they beat Kentucky, they beat North Carolina.
They beat Kansas, too.
They beat Kansas. I mean, there's not
Those
many
are
teams.
good teams.
Those are really solid teams.
Yeah.
I mean, historically, we could do the research and show how many national championships does Kansas and North Carolina have, and they rolled right through those. And Kentucky. So, I mean, they've had a pretty amazing run at it. And the other side of the bracket, Michigan State, Texas Tech. To me, the bigger surprise there is certainly Texas Tech. You know, but Michigan State historically has performed well. Coach Izzo's kind of a seasoned guy. You know, you'll probably have to give the edge to Michigan State in that one, maybe because of experience, coaching experience, and the program's probably a little more used to being in the limelight than, say, a Texas Tech. Texas Tech, more of a, you think of them as more of a football school. You know,
yeah, exactly.
Being in Texas, but so I think it's a great storyline that they've come out of there, and they're playing excellent basketball. They too have a pretty balanced attack. Their high scorer is Savon Flagg at 13, almost 14 points a game, and very evenly spread out in the scoring. So maybe that's what it takes. Maybe a more balanced attack has what it takes. You know, it'll be a fun game to watch, that's for sure.
Yeah, I can't wait. They're going to be great games, hopefully.
I think we have setting up for some great storylines, which we all like to follow, but hopefully the games kind of live up to the storylines, and who knows? I mean, I have Virginia winning it all, so I'll be rooting for them to kind of go the distance. But I wouldn't be surprised at Auburn, the way that they've gone through all these other teams. I don't think you could be shocked that Auburn pulls one off in the end there and gets to the finals. They
very well could. They've played exceptionally well as of late. And Virginia, yeah, they're in their first Final Four since 1984. It's been a while.
Man.
They are the one seed, so in my opinion, they should win that game. They are the better team. But Auburn definitely could pull it off.
They could. I think the Virginia was a 5-point favorite, I believe. Slightly, I think 5.5-point favorite, which on paper that sounds about right. I mean, I think that those numbers make sense to me. But anything can happen in the Final Four, and I wouldn't be surprised for an upset there. But I think on paper Virginia handles them by 10 points and walks easily into the finals.
I agree with you. I think Virginia's the better team. They should win. Initially, I wasn't as high on Virginia going into the tournament because they tend to underperform in this tournament, especially as we mentioned, they lost at UMBC last year. They're on the wrong side of history. This year they're looking to end up on the right side of history by winning it all.
It would be a heck of a redemption story, wouldn't it?
It would, for sure.
It would be rags to riches for sure. And again, on paper, I agree. I think they're the favorite. I wouldn't be surprised to see them pull it off, being the number one seed, the only number one seed to make it that far. The destiny is kind of in their hands. It's in their court. If they can handle the pressure and rise to the occasion, I think they got a good shot.
Definitely. And for the next game, Michigan State and Texas Tech, I have to go with Michigan State for this one. I think Texas Tech's a great story as well.
Yep.
They have a phenomenal defense, one of the most efficient in the league.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, that's a close one. I think the favorite there is Michigan State, and it's only by 2 points. But I'm gonna call the upset here. I'm gonna say Texas Tech rides the wave. They keep the Red Raiders going, and I think they pull them off by the narrowest of margins, maybe 2-3 point win, something like a 68-65 win. I'm gonna say Texas Tech pulls that one off in the upset in that bracket.
That very well could happen. Texas Tech's played phenomenal all tournament. The reason I'm picking Michigan State is just because of experience.
Hard to beat that, and I agree with where you're coming. I think this time of year, can Texas Tech ride the hot players that they've had? Can that carry over into this week? Do they handle the hype of the press conferences and all the hullabaloo that goes on with the Final Four? I'm saying they do. I'm saying they keep the hot hand going and they keep it all together. So we'll see. Again, it's going to be a great game to watch. I think that's certainly the more closer matchup. On paper, Virginia really should take Auburn. This one here, I think, is more of a toss-up, and I think the Red Raiders are going to be gutsy like they've been the whole tournament and pull one out.
All right, so that means your championship is Virginia and Texas Tech.
Correct.
Who do you like in that game?
Well, I've got Virginia kind of walking away there with a 10-point victory, maybe 78-68, somewhere in there. I really think Virginia, if they can get by Auburn, I think the confidence comes back. I think they feel that they'll be in the driver's seat. And I think they handle Texas Tech. Maybe Texas Tech kind of cools off under the big, bright lights of the finals. And Virginia kind of takes it kind of into maybe a 10-point victory is what I'm feeling.
My championship game is Michigan State versus Virginia. This should be a great game in my opinion. I think two great all-time basketball schools that haven't won a championship in a long time. Both teams will battle it out till the very end. I have to go with Virginia for this one. Again, I just think their fortunes have changed. I wasn't as high on them before.
Yeah.
This is the year, though. I think they get it done, and they will win probably 79-73, something in that range. It'll be a close, higher-scoring battle.
Yep, I can see that. I mean, certainly Michigan State can get past Texas Tech, and again, even that Michigan State matchup, I think Virginia still is in the driver's seat there. I think you're right. If they get to the finals, I think they're going to ride the wave and say, hey, this is their year to kind of make redemption happen, and wouldn't be shocking to see that happen. And either way, looking for a good game in the finals on Monday night. It's always a great TV sports night of the year to watch the finals. Yeah. And we'll see. We'll see how it all pans out.
All right. How does this Final Four compare to your original picks? I'm sure it doesn't match.
It's close on some ways. I was good early. My original picks were I had Virginia playing North Carolina in the finals, and then I had Duke versus Florida State. I thought Florida State played particularly well in the regular season. I thought that they were kind of gelling towards the end of the season. I was really high on them. They just couldn't keep it together. Lost to a Gonzaga team, but so I had Florida State playing Duke on that side. Eventually, Duke versus Virginia, and I thought Virginia. I did pick Virginia way back to win the whole thing, and that certainly would help my pool if they pull it off on Monday.
Yeah, you might be right there. Virginia could go all the way.
So that would get in that championship game usually is a lot of points. How did your Final Four pan out compared to what's on paper?
I initially had Duke, Texas Tech, Purdue, and North Carolina. Oh. I initially thought Duke and UNC were clear locks, both one seeds, both historically great programs. I was surprised that the only one I got correct was Texas Tech.
The one you go out on a limb on actually come to fruition if you had gone. Well, look, you could see how Purdue, that game like you said, by the slimmest of margins, you could have Purdue in the finals here, and you have 2 teams left in your bracket with good chances to have a national championship. So, yeah, that's that's the mystery of the brackets. How do you really see it all playing out? It's a tough thing to predict, but you were close.
I was hoping I'd get at least 3 out of 4. For a while, all 4 teams remained alive.
Yeah. Yeah, I had a good once Duke went down for me, and Gonzaga. I had Gonzaga losing to Florida State.
Same.
I felt like Gonzaga was probably a little bit overrated, and this I think was the year. They really had some talent this year, above and beyond what they've had. I think playing on the West Coast there, maybe not in the toughest conference. I think they get under the heat of the tournament and face some pretty fierce competition, and sometimes that hurts them. But I think this year they had some real talent, and I will say I was surprised to see Gonzaga beat Florida State when they did, and it was an interesting game, interesting games.
It was. I initially figured Gonzaga was one of the weaker 1 seeds just because of how they've performed before. I wasn't as high on them, so I didn't pick them to go that far.
Yeah, we talked about Villanova earlier. You had Villanova, one of these perennial teams that's played great in the tournament and done well, and you got a team like Gonzaga, who's historically not done too well in the tournament, and the tables kind of turned there. Gonzaga made kind of a decent run, really played some excellent basketball. The guy's name was Mitchell in there for them. He played fantastic. I mean, he is a real player. I think he's going to be an NBA prospect. He kind of carried them. That made me a little nervous too, that they really only had 1 or 2 guys that were standouts. But hey, they under the bright lights of the big stage, they played well, and they deserved to win some games there.
Exactly. As we said earlier, the Final Four is really hard to predict. It's so difficult. The odds of completing a perfect bracket are 1 in 9.2 quintillion.
Jeez. Wow, think about that. I mean,
it's crazy.
And that's probably why you win $1 million or whatever they say on ESPN or whatever, if you get every bracket right. So it sounds like ESPN isn't taking a big stretch by making that promise.
Yeah, every year I'm always so confident thinking, oh, I've definitely given this bracket some thought. I'm going to fill out multiple brackets as well just to improve my odds by not much, but you never know. Yeah,
it's amazing. On paper, you look at it and you say, hey, this team should have an easy road, or this team should make it that far, and the twists and turns of the tournament, it ends up, kind of not happening the way you think. But it's not an exact science, that's for sure. You could have all the analytics that you think are correct, and some team comes along like an Auburn and just plays lights out. Again, how many people have Auburn in the Final Four? Probably very few.
I can't name anyone.
Yeah, I mean, if we would look back and did some polling on that, it would be very few people. I bet you have that. So.
I'm sure Charles Barkley's happy that Auburn made it this far.
Charles is probably ecstatic, his alumni there and his alma mater. And I can actually, I'm dating myself, but I can remember him back in the day playing for Auburn, and a good rebounder and a great all-around player. But that's right, I forgot about that connection. So I'm sure he'll be watching very curiously as to how that game will come out.
What's ironic was he actually picked against Auburn.
Did he really?
He didn't have him going that far.
That's great. So, hey. I'm a big Syracuse basketball fan, and I had them losing in the first round to Baylor. I felt like Baylor was a tough team and not a good matchup for my team, the Cuse, who I like. But sometimes you get it right. I'm sure he's glad that he got it wrong, though, at this point.
Yeah. All right. Any closing remarks before the Final Four takes place?
No, I'm really excited to watch this year's Final Four. I've watched it pretty closely, probably closer than I've watched some other tournaments, and I think it's some great storylines. If Virginia doesn't win, I hope it's a storyline like Texas Tech or an Auburn, some kind of an upset. I think that would be good for college basketball, but I'm just like every other fan out there. I'm excited and looking forward to watching it.
Can you imagine if it ended up being, after all this hype, Texas Tech versus Auburn, 2 great football schools, but not necessarily historically great when it comes to basketball?
Yeah, you got a SEC team in there. Imagine that, and being in the finals. I mean, again, like you said, football schools, perennial. You think of them as football programs, but that would be a cool storyline, and that's what makes watching this so fun. Is to say, holy cow, who would have thought that we've got Texas Tech versus an Auburn in the finals? I bet you people would almost watch that more than they'd watch Virginia, Michigan. So that would be an interesting game. I bet you Let's say this. Who do you think would win between a Texas Tech and an Auburn? tough one to call.
I have to go with Texas Tech just because they have a better defense, and in that scenario, I always like to pick the team with better defense.
I think that's a very good point, and I think both teams would be a little nervous under the big stage. And I think it's a little easier to play defense than it is to play offense under that pressure. So I would do the same. I would pick Texas Tech to pull that out.
All right, I'm certainly excited for the Final Four. I hope you are too.
Me too.
Yeah.
Should be fun.
Yeah, I'm looking forward.
Me too.
All right, that will wrap up for today.
Awesome.
Thank you for watching Sportshire. We'll see you next time.